Good morning and kia ora koutou, welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, Farming with the Sun, Exploring Agrivoltaics from a Farming Perspective. My name's Anna Vaughan. I am a farm consultant based in Canterbury, and I have been working with Alan Brent from the Victoria University of Wellington for about 18 months now on our Land and Water Rural Professional Fund project, looking into the feasibility of agrivoltaics. Originally, it was focused on livestock farming in Canterbury, and as the project has developed, we've sort of broadened that scope. So what is agrivoltaics? Agrivoltaics is basically a dual land use where we are looking to continue farming or try a different kind of farming, while also generating electricity from solar energy with solar panels above. So why is that important? Basically, some of you will be aware that New Zealand has made a commitment to move to 100% renewable energy by 2030. And that's going to require a bit of a shift in how we're generating electricity and power currently. So we can basically expect to see solar farms coming to New Zealand at a larger scale than what we've seen to date. So I was originally a little bit concerned about this, coming from a farming background, about what that meant for our food production. As you know, solar farms are best suited to flat land. And so I got to thinking, surely there's got to be a way that we can design solar farms so we can continue to use that land for food production as well. And so as part of the process of our Land and Water project, I was put in contact with Alan Brent from Victoria University of Wellington. And Alan's basically an expert on renewable energy systems. And I might, if you're able to, Alan, I might just ask you to provide a bit of an introduction to yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everybody in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and good afternoon and evening to our panelists. So I head up the Sustainable Energy Systems group here at Wellington Faculty of Engineering, and there's a whole range of things that we work on, but we've been working for many years on microgrids and in communities, and that's the integration of different renewable energy systems. And we were working with communities in rural areas, obviously, and the farming communities, and that led us into, okay, as Anna said, can we actually use the land more productively in those communities? And obviously, we've seen what happened. We're going to hear today in the US, Germany, France, and down in Chile, all over the world, Japan. Agrivoltaics has really taken off. It's not a new concept. It was introduced in the early 80s, but it is sort of like dormant. But now as solar PV has really become so affordable and competitive, really, in the electricity market. And now in New Zealand, we have many, just to give a bit of context, we only have nearly 10 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity in the country. But the government commissioned a generation investment survey in 2022, which was redone in 2023 by Concept Consulting, released in January of this year. And it just shows that 80% of the committed and actively pursued new generation projects in the country are solar farms. And we saw the first large solar farms being commissioned in the last few months. So the one up in Qatar that you will be aware of, they are allowing sheep grazing there, so it's starting to happen in New Zealand. And we just want to, with this webinar, follow up on the first webinar to get a bit of perspectives from elsewhere in terms of the learning that has happened and what can we take from that and taking this forward in our country. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks very much, Alan. So what I'll do now is go very quickly through our key findings from our original project, and I'll also provide a link to where all our project resources are. So for those who aren't familiar with the project, you can go away, find that information. And if you have any questions after this webinar, feel free to get in touch with Ellen or myself. But in terms of questions, I'm really keen to keep the focus on our speakers for this webinar. It's fantastic to have them here, so let's make the most of that opportunity. So our key findings from the project, looking at livestock farming in Canterbury and integrating solar energy generation, was that Canterbury is suitable for agrivoltaics, but like anywhere, it's very site specific. So there's certain criteria that need to be met that make your site more or less suitable. There are multiple potential benefits. We've got things around shade and shelter. There's the additional and alternative revenue, and that in our financial analysis proved to be really, really significant for the sheep and beef farmers. However, because this is a new concept to New Zealand, there are still a lot of unknowns. And that's, like Alan said, that's what drove a lot of the thinking behind this webinar, is we've got an opportunity to learn from people who've been involved previously or currently, and it makes sense to tap into that knowledge. One of our key recommendations from our project was to bring farmers, developers and legislators together now and to plan our approach around solar farm design and agrivoltaics in a really systems approach, so that we can learn from what's been done previously in other countries and get that dual land use right, while also factoring in environmental considerations, how we can do things best for our land and water. Yeah, I'm feeling incredibly grateful to have such interesting speakers join us today. So first up, we will have Rob Hodgkins. Rob is a sheep and arable farmer based over in England. Rob was a Nuffield scholar and spent a bit of time here in New Zealand, so is familiar with our farming system and environment, and is now grazing some of his sheep, I think Romney and dairy sheep, Rob can correct me there, under solar panels in a grazing arrangement. And Rob will talk about some of his key learnings to date. We'll then have J.R. Howard. So J.R. and his wife own and run Texas Solar Sheep, and that's a vegetation management service for large-scale solar farms. And we were just chatting before the webinar started, that business is scaling rapidly. And so I just would be really interesting to hear from J.R. around his experiences to date with this quite novel and new business model, and opportunities that has come from that. We'll then move to Tony Inder. Tony is a merino stud breeder and farmer based in New South Wales, Australia. I believe Tony has 400 hectares of solar panels on one of his properties, so there's a bit of scale there. And it will be, and is also part of a study investigating wool traits of sheep that are grazing under panels, and can also speak from that experience of being a land owner with that solar panel development. And then finally, we're really lucky to have a presentation from Byron Kominek, who is the owner of Jack's Solar Garden. Jack's Solar Garden is a smaller scale solar farm compared to what Tony's got going on. And it's a market garden focus, but a real community focus. And so Byron's not able to join us today, but we're really lucky to have Emily Puetz with us. And Emily is a director of Jack's Solar, the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Centre. And that learning centre is a non-profit associated with Jack's Solar Garden. So really lucky to hear that perspective of a really cool initiative. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rob. I'll just stop sharing my screen so you can see Rob. And yeah, there you go, Rob.
Good as gold. Good as gold. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've tried to be as New Zealand as I can. I've got my Swazi top on, looking for some sponsorship in the future. So if Swazi are listening, then please send me lots and lots of your waterproof stuff, because it's a bloody good kit. In the background are some of our New Zealand Romneys. You guys may recognise them. They're a mixture of bloodlines from the Wairiri stud near Masterton under Derek Daniels. and Andrew Tripp's Nithdale stud over down in Galway. We fly over pretty regular shipments of rams, and we've pretty much we have just got a New Zealand based system, just happens to be in the southeast of England. So I can say with a relative degree of confidence that New Zealand Romneys work very well under solar panels, talking from experience. My farming journey started about 10 years ago, about the same sort of time the UK was going through its green revolution, so to say, and we started throwing up solar panels here, there and everywhere, particularly in the area I am, which is about 35 minutes north of London. There's a big major power line that goes straight from Norfolk, where no one lives, and so that's where they build all the nuclear power stations, just in case they have an accident, because no one will really realise. And they ship a bloody great power cable straight through to London, where everyone is, and provides all the power. And along that sort of power line, there's multiple opportunities to sort of plug into the grid, if you like. So from a site-specific kind of area, we're in a real sort of sweet spot of a country with we are the sunniest part of the country. We have a major power line going straight through the county. So the solar around here has just absolutely exploded. We're in a very, being so close to London, we're pretty populated. I think when I've done the sums for a few talks in New Zealand, we have more people within 20 miles than you guys have in your country, which is pretty mad, because we incorporate most of North London, Cambridge, Stevenage, across through Bedford. So yeah, that sort of gives you an idea of what we have to contend with. We love the solar sites. They are brilliant. When we first started, no one wanted anything to do with them. So the companies were sort of hiring Albanians and Eastern Europeans out, and all they were doing was just trimming the grass sort of 3, 4, 5 times a year. And that was, what they wanted to do. Brexit came, and obviously we sort of exited the EU in a fairly chaotic fashion, which meant we couldn't sort of import a lot of cheap labor anymore. So suddenly that really kicked off looking at what they could do to try and manage these sites, because a lot of people in England are lazy and don't want to work, so they don't really have that cheap pool of labor to be able to drive mowers and strimmers, etc., around these vast sites. I mean, some of the sites are pretty big. We're sort of talking 60 to 90 hectares in size, something like that. In terms of our climate, just to give you a wee bit of a background, we're on about 600 mil of rain. Highs of last year we hit 40 degrees, but that was mad. Usually we should be like 35 degrees, 30 degrees, something like that. Fairly mild during the winter as well. And topography would be relatively flat. We'd be on or around sea level, and there wouldn't be many hills to speak of. So that sort of gives you an idea of the environment we're working in. We started throwing sheep under the solar panels just as a wee bit of an experiment to see how it went. And we've sort of just been picking up more and more sites as we go along. We find they're fantastic for sheep. They're secure, because we have a large population and some of them aren't very honest, and copper is worth a lot of money. They have to be sort of fairly well security monitored. So everything's got motion sensors, everything's got cameras, everything's got bloody great deer fencing to sort of stop people wandering through it. There's no footpath through it. In England, we have these weird things called footpaths, where back in the olden days, before cars and shit, if you wanted to go to a church, you just had to walk from a town to a church. They just had a straight line straight through any land that went there, and so it's kind of a weird thing. So during the lambing paddocks and things, when we're lambing outside on non-solar land, we'll have maybe on an Easter weekend 150 people walk through a paddock. We've counted, and that can play havoc with outside lambing, because people are letting their dogs loose and all this sort of stuff. Little children racing after the lambs, and concerned citizens picking up newborn lambs because they think they're in distress. So with the solar panels, we get none of that. It's a secure site. No one is allowed, which suits me down to the ground. So we just throw the sheep on there and kind of forget about them during lambing, which is great, because one of the downsides to it is actually, from a UK perspective, I appreciate it's not the same in New Zealand, but by law we're required to check the sheep every day, or have eyes on the sheep every day, which in solar sites can prove challenging. So we have to work around that regulation. But yeah, lambing under them is a doddle. It's brilliant. They're spared for worst of the weather. They've got shade. Typical solar panel sites for us would be maybe a panel 3 meters and then another panel. We have got a couple of sites where they're real close together. We can just about get a quad or a four-wheeler sort of down them, and that's about it. And that's pretty rubbish, to be honest. The only grasses that really grow there are pretty much weed grasses, you know, the stuff that, cocksfoot, that kind of stuff, the more natural varieties that sheep don't really like to eat. Again, it has its uses. Post-tupping will tend us to throw the sheep out there and forget about them for 3 or 4 months. It's like I say, it's great in terms of that sort of thing over winter. Secure site, you can put them down there, you can forget about them. All the sites have water because the companies need to be cleaning the panel, so everything's got running water. You can put a water trough in. Like I say, big high fences, security cameras all around, so you sort of, you can log in and keep an eye on the sheep that way. The best solar sites are, like I say, the ones with about 3 meter gaps, 3.5 meter gaps, because you can get a small tractor through it. So we've done a lot of work in reseeding, working with the solar panels and a local university. Nothing as prestigious as the University of Canterbury, obviously, just a small local English one. But we looked at different grass varieties and how we could actually work with the solar companies to cut down on their workload. They to them, grass was just grass. It was all the same. It was just green and it was a pain. But we were able to work with them. We started putting in a lot of plantains and clovers, specifically red clovers, because they're quite aggressive in nature. Specific varieties of whites as well. The real key to it was just making sure they didn't grow too tall. One of the biggest problems with grass is obviously it rushes to head, and you ended up with something up above your knees, and it starts shading out the panels, and that's a real no-no. Anything shading the panels is a massive no-no to the solar companies, because that's how they make their money. By talking to them, and we were able to convince them that actually, clovers, plantains are probably only 30 centimeters high. There is never a chance, even if the sheep don't get there all summer or winter, that it's never going to get high enough to really affect the solar output. And that was a game changer for them. So now when we've worked with about 3 solar companies across the sort of southeast of England, and we're all sort of now putting my wee little mix, which, like I say, is a lot of plantain, a lot of clover, and minimal amount of grass, to be honest. The advantage of the clover and plantain, obviously, is nutritional quality remains a lot more during the summer. The quality feed is slightly better rather than grass, which tends to go to head and then goes to rank. Actually, by using these herbs, we're able to sort of maintain quality, keep live weight gain on lambs, going a lot deeper into the season, because there are times when we can't graze them. I mean, I know we do lamb under them, but to be honest, it'll only be mature singles that have done it all before, that are in fairly poor body condition score. So we know we're not going to have any hung lambs or issues like that, because again, whilst there's no footpaths going through the panels, there are footpaths and general sort of public going round the edges of them. So if they sort of see a ewe with a bearing hanging out, or a ewe with lambs sort of hanging out its arse dead, then we're obviously going to get into a bit of trouble with the RSPCA. So you just have to monitor what stock you put in there and make sure it's appropriate for the conditions, etc., etc. How am I doing for time? Am I waffling on a wee bit, or are we good? Yeah, no, give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. No one's interrupted me yet, so I'll carry on. Thumbs up, that's good. What else can we say? Yeah, I mean, we've looked at reseeding. The very difficult bit with it is we've had a few disasters on solar panels where they went in quickly and they were constructed over winter, and the ground compaction was just incredible. I mean, these companies have got no kind of mechanical sympathy or soil sympathy, so they were just bringing in massive great loaders, ruts everywhere, putting it in as quick as possible. I appreciate why they were putting it in as quick as possible, because we had an arbitrary 1st of March deadline when the tariffs changed from the government, and so the money they were going to get was going to change quite dramatically. So come hell or high water, by the 1st of March, that sort of 70 acres of panels was going to be in, and it was going to be producing. But the damage they did to the soil was just incredible doing it, and we're still living with those consequences, probably 5 to 6 years later. In terms of stock density would be probably, if we work on a rule of thumb, about half of a normal pasture. So if it's a crap pasture, work on half. If it's a brilliant pasture with plantain and clover, we sort of work on half as well, figuring that about half the ground is shaded and that sort of thing. So yeah. So what we're talking, sorry to give you we probably work about 2 to 3 ewes to the acre, something like that. 3 times 2.6, 9 ewes to the hectare, 9 ewes to the hectare, something like that. That would be a typical stocking rate. More during the summer, and again, the nice thing about the solar panels is in the winter when it's raining and cold and horrible, the solar panel people don't care, so we can sort of stock it very, very heavily on some of the crap ones that we've got no plantain clover and aren't interested in putting in plantain and clover. We basically just treat it like an outside yard. We can run up there with sort of 20 bales of silage, chuck silage all around the outside, and the sheep can just meander in there, and they have a very happy winter. It's almost like being in a barn. They sort of stay under the solar panels most of the time out of the rain, so their ME requirements are relatively low because they're not sort of in the freezing cold. They're out of the wind. They're fairly sheltered, and they just munch down on silage. Like I say, post joining, just because again it's easy that way. We have done some joining in solar panels and been very successful. I was kind of worried that Ram might keep knocking his head and might put him off his stroke a little bit, but no, he seemed to be a real soldier and carry on. Bless him. I guess that's a male influence in him. Yeah. So how we do for time? Do we still all right, or are we coming up to an end?
Yeah, coming up to an end now, Rob.
Coming up to an end now. All right. Well, like I said, happy to have any kind of questions in the Q&A. Just give us a shout.
Fantastic. No, that was brilliant. And some really good insights there. And interesting to hear about some of those pasture mixes and herd mixes and their role on site. I'll hand over now. Sorry.
I was just going to say quick, the final thing is just getting them out of the solar panels. It's all about water placement. So on each solar panel, if you can, when you're working with your developer on every site, if you can just have like even just a couple of acres not clear of solar panels, almost like a fenced field within the panels, stick your water tank in there, and the sheep will always start walking in there. And it makes it so easy when you're trying to gather with dogs, because you'll be on your knees climbing under the solar panels. The dogs are pissed off somewhere and you can't find them, and everything will be going wrong. But as long as you just keep making a hoo-ha, beeping a horn, having the dogs have a bark up, they will all run to that water trough, because it's their place they go. And then you can shut them in that field with no solar panels, and then you're good as gold. You can set the Prattley up, you can set some hand in yards and go away. No, we don't pay for any of the solar panel grazing at all. We're well, to be honest, it would cost them money if we weren't there. So I'm almost at the stage of starting to charge people for grazing solar panels, which is pretty mad. But yeah, it's been very good for our business. It's allowed us to expand. It's given us lots of overwintering options, and yeah, come drought time or if we have a particular sort of hard time, it gives us a bit of an overspill for the ewes, just to be able to push ewes off farm very cheaply.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
No worries.
And I'll just hand over now to JR. And so, as I mentioned before, JR and his family run Texas Solar Sheep, which is a vegetation management business for large-scale solar in Texas.
Yeah, Anna, thanks for the invite. We're a sheep operator. We actually have total vegetation management company now. I'll kind of go into that story a little bit, but starting about 3 years ago, we got on the first solar farm as basically a pilot project. It was supposed to be a 6-month pilot. I think we moved about 400 ewes on that site at the time. And it was just on a portion of the site that was about a 1,600 acre site, 270 or 80 megawatt. But anyway, we moved those sheep on the site on one portion of the site for a pilot project, and then just a few months in, they kind of understood the benefits of the sheep over mechanical mowing, or just all mechanical mowing in these high rainfall areas. So we got into a full contract with them for that first year on the whole site, and we've expanded from there. Now we run about 5,800 ewes on solar, and that number is going to double by the end of this year just on new contracts we have this year. One thing that's changed a lot: when we started 3 years ago, it was sheep only. Now most all asset owners want a complete vegetation management contract, so they're happy to have our sheep managing vegetation for them, but whatever the sheep don't eat, or if we get extra rain or we get outrun on the vegetation, we do have mowing crews and spraying crews, and we do mow and spray as part of our service. So we do have an all-in service. We do charge by the acre for that service. What we can get done with the sheep is definitely cheaper than mechanical for these asset owners, and a big benefit for us. So, but we don't, at the same time, we graze very large scale sites. They're not really building a site in Texas anymore that's probably less than 1,000 acres. That's the low end. Everything's on up from there. And the areas we're in are high rainfall. So we're in 35 to 55 inches of rainfall. And so high growth rates. We have some type of vegetation down here in the south that will grow year round. So it's it's not a 6-month deal and 6 months of weather that keeps it from growing. So we're on sites year round. We manage each site as a separate ranch or farm, whatever you want to call it. We have full-time local personnel on each site that manage those sites, and we do have sites that are 4 and 5 hours apart. So we're kind of spread out amongst those big sites, and they're all kind of operated independently. We do keep sheep on these sites year round. We lamb on site. It's a full production model on site for us. And so going back to the mowing, I get a lot of questions on the, we call it our hybrid model, which is basically we're going to do as much work as we can with the sheep, and then the balance is going to be mowed. But the mechanical on these very large sites that are very high vegetation growth are, the mechanical actually makes the management of the sheep very flexible, because we don't have to stock sheep at that maximum flush rate we're going to get in the spring and summer to meet the goals of our contract. Our contract will have an overall vegetation height specification that we have to meet to meet contract specifications. So really, if we can get the sheep to do 70 or 80% of the work and we mow 20% of it, that's not that bad of a deal, because it really makes it more flexible. So if we get a warm and dry weather pattern, we don't have any rain for 5 or 6 weeks, we're really not affected on our stocking rate we just don't have to mow. So we kind of use that mechanical piece as a flexible piece for us. It's not what we like to do. We like to do more with sheep. We make more money on sheep. The sheep are better for these sites than mowing. One thing we have been able to do is starting out, when we started this 3 years ago, there wasn't a lot of very large scale year round solar grazing going on. So we just kind of had to figure out as we went. And at the same time had to get buy-in from asset owners to think that sheep would work on that large a scale. I mean, it's been being done 15 plus years in the Northeast and East Coast on very small sites, 10, 20 acres. But at large scale, 3 years ago, it was kind of, there was very few sites that big being grazed. So we kind of had to prove ourselves and show that the sheep worked for that solution, and that it was a better solution all around. So once we were able to do that, we actually have more work than we could do now. We turn down work, and what it has allowed us to do is get into more pieces of our business now, where we do cut hay on sites, and we are doing no-till drill planning on sites. That 3 years ago they would have sure said no. But now that they've kind of seen that the sheep work, that's kind of been the gateway to being able to try some of these other farming practices that probably just a couple of years ago we would have been told no on even trying it. So we are cutting hay now on our sites for our sheep for the winter, and doing some no-till planning that just started this past 7-8 months, really, since last summer. So that's kind of where we're at. We're really, the way these asset owners in the U.S. are, this is really a service, and we have to think of it that way. It's not just a grazing lease, or like our typical grazing lease we have on regular ranch land. It's really a service, and you're held to standards on what that site looks like, and that's all based on their insurance requirements. So the insurance company that covers these sites will tell them what those vegetation height requirements are and what we have to meet for them to keep their insurance for fire. Texas, we have big fire hazards is the big one, but also shading of the panels and things like that, which really the fire hazard is much worse than even shading. But so what we're seeing is a lot of focus on fire risk. So We do have now, now that we're 3 years in, we are actually getting a lot of buy-in on the construction side. So, initially we just got a site how it was, and fortunately the sheep can kind of work just about on any kind of site and make it work without a lot of modifications. But now we're actually getting a lot of buy-in now in the construction phase and even development phase before construction, where these companies are actually putting us in cross fencing, hard net wire cross fencing, water lines and water troughs, and all kinds of improvements on these sites in construction, where they're actually sheep ready, farm ready, whatever you want to call it. Once we get it, instead of, currently on a lot of the sites, we have miles and miles of electric fence put up, splitting up some of these pastures for our rotational grazing, because it is to really manage these right, you have to be very intensive with your rotational grazing on these high rainfall sites to keep it all under control. And that means lots and lots of electric fence. So luckily we're starting to see some improvements put in construction that's really going to help. And in the long run, that asset owner is going to be able to, get a little cheaper O&M rate from us if it's already set up for water and fencing and that kind of thing. I see the question there on the spacing on those panels. Most of our sites have above ground cab lines, like you see in the background of my picture back there. You can see those cables down at the end. So you can't just run a tractor all the way down and come out the other side, which makes it very expensive and very hard to mow. Most of these big sites, we're talking 1,500 to 2,500 acres. You may have to mow 80 or 90% of that site may have to be mowed with like a 0-turn mower or riding mower. So when you start thinking about mowing 1,500, 2,000 acres with 0-turn or riding mowers, there's a very expensive and very hard to do. None of those mowers are built for these kind of conditions and mowing pasture. So, I would say most of these that we have are 20 to 25 feet between the piles, but that really doesn't matter, because when you get down to the end, you can't come out. You have to, the only way to use a tractor would really be to back all the way down and then drive back out the same lane, which takes forever. So we use big 0-turn mowers that cut 82 inches wide. They're big commercial mowers. But like I said, none of them are made for what we use them for. So they're broke down all the time, and it's just always an issue. It's not like a tractor. Even these, $25,000, $30,000 riding mowers are not made for mowing thousands of acres on rough ground. So, but that's the kind of equipment we have to have. We spray a little bit around some of the inverters and the gates and stuff like that. We try to do very little chemical spraying. I'm trying to stay away from that. But we do have to do some mowing, and that's just part of our hybrid plan to manage these sites. It's so hard to always follow that peak stocking rate on very high rainfall and very high growth rates, that you're just never you're gonna always be losing trying to stock it at max stocking rate. You're either gonna overgraze it, or it's gonna get away from you, one or the other. So we just, like I said, we use the mechanical to make the whole thing flexible and then make the customer happy with what they want the sites to look like. We are, just real quick, we are working a lot with pollinator friendly habitat, and some of that is integrated into the whole system, into the whole site, where our rotational grazing, these big sites, even a 2,000 acre site, we probably only have sheep on a quarter of that site at one time. They're getting rotated around. There's big rest periods, 45, 60 days at least, probably on the sites, on the areas where we're not currently grazing. So we have a lot of promotion there on flowering plants and making that work. And then some sites actually have fenced off areas that have their own pollinator species. We've got some that have, maybe 40 or 50 acres fenced off and just planted for pollinator species. And then we graze those out in the fall and the winter, and then get the sheep back off of them for the spring. And really we're seeing better flowering plant growth on the areas where we're grazing than we see in the site that's left alone, just because that the hoof action, manure, and everything else that goes along with that, it's just a better natural setup. And we had a company come out last spring to take some pictures of a 50-acre area they had planted that they wanted isolated from the sheep to promote their pollinator, kind of what they want to do with pollinators. And they ended up taking about 90% of the pictures of the flowers where the sheep were, not where the isolated pollinator area was. They just grow better where we have the animal impacts. I think that's it. I'm kind of rambling on. I can wait on the Q&A and try to answer what I can. Like I said, we're still figuring it out. We've had to kind of learn it as we go. There wasn't really any background on large scale grazing. So we've kind of learned the hard way, just doing it and figuring it out. So
excellent. Hey, thanks very much, JR. I see there is another question there. We'll just hold that one till the end, and we'll come back and address that then. But yeah, really appreciate that insight, and it seems like you've learned a lot in what, 2-3 years. So yeah, interesting that you've been able to, well, you're looking to double your business this year, so that's fascinating. Our next speaker is Tony Inder, and Tony is, as I mentioned, is a merino farmer based in New South Wales. I think Tony was having some trouble with, oh no, the camera, he's back. So I'll hand over to you, Tony, to introduce yourself and what you're doing with solar.
Well, good evening, depending on where you may be. My name's Tony Inder. I'm a 54-year-old, 6th-generation farmer from Central West New South Wales, Australia. I spent the first 15 years of my working life as a shearer. During that time, I got married, and with my wife, we set about setting ourselves up on a property where we own a merino stud, along with a commercial operation. So basically, my entire working life has been with sheep and wool. Approximately 4 years ago, our neighbouring property, 600 hectares, became a solar farm of 400 hectares. And after discussions with the owner of the solar farm, we started running sheep under the panels. Now, the following, what I'm about to say, are experiences from myself grazing under the panels. And I would like to say that I haven't been reproached or received any remuneration from anyone. I've copped a bit of flack about that in Australian media. So I can honestly say I've received nothing and won't receive anything. We are currently grazing approximately 2,000 dry sheep under the panels. I agree with Rob that we could lamb under them, and we could lamb successfully, but just issues around our mustering here and things just make it a little bit difficult. So dry sheep are a lot easier to run, as we can drop them in and drop them out depending on how the season goes. Yeah, the idea to graze stemmed from just a conversation with a bloke at the local pub, actually, one of the managers. He indicated that it was costing them $90,000 a year to mow, and he was going to have to mow 6 times a year. The fire hazard restrictions within New South Wales, it's a maximum of 100 mil growth. It obviously blows out a bit more than that at times, but that's the ideal height that they want to aim at. So I suggested that I could reduce this with the help of the sheep, and I thought they would adapt quite well to panel life. But what I found is they've adapted and they've thrived far better than I thought that they ever would. I think this is deemed by our environment here is 600 mil rainfall average, which we never receive average. It ranges anywhere from 200 to 1,500. And I just think when we get small amounts of rain with the no gutter effect of the panels and the runoff, we produce a lot more. A 5 mil fall of rain will actually produce benefit, depending on whether it falls in the morning or whether it falls in the evening as to the benefit. We find that it's always green under the panels. So just at the moment here, we've been through a bit of a dry phase, whereas under the panels, it's still lush and green. I just think for wool production, it really works. Our normal rainfall pattern, we go from boom to bust maybe 5 or 6 times a year with a flush of feed, and then basically drying back to what is standing hay. So we do find that the panels just contain a level of plant and nutrition. So the microbes in the sheep gut don't have to adjust. They just can stay consistent all year. And in benefit of that, we find that our Newton strength in our wool increases, and the sheep are genuinely certainly appear happier and definitely graze better. The sheep also benefit, obviously, with the sheep, as the other fellows mentioned, in our 40-degree plus days in summer, up to 45 degrees, they're shaded all the time, whereas it still remains green underneath, because whereas the shade created by trees, the trees also draw the moisture. So under the panels, the moisture is always there, so it's always shaded. And then in winter time, when we can drop down to -5, it's a similar. It creates a windbreak and it creates a shelter for the sheep, so they're quite content to wander around under there. I see potential for further, and I was interested to hear the other fellows that they're sowing between the rows. We have some initial discussions with our blokes about it, but we haven't actually trialled anything yet. We hope to in the near future. We have reduced their mowing from 6 mowings a year to 2, and they're also doing a broadleaf spray heading into winter. That's when our broadleafs germinate, and then as we hit the warmer months, that's when they take off and take over the pasture. So yeah, just a light spray when they first germinate, and then the sheep take care of that. Yeah, we've done a few trials with the sheep, and it's an ongoing trial where we've got a controlled mob that runs outside the panels, and when we shear those at the same time as the ones under the panels, and we select a random group from under the panels. Like it's usually 1 in 20 or 1 in 30 as the sheep come through at shearing time, and we take fleece weights and we do micron tests on those. And so far the benefits have up to 20% increase in production from the sheep grazing under the panels in our environment. I will point out that the farm where our sheep graze, 600 hectares, 400 hectares of panels, it was largely unimproved pasture when we started. So based on an unimproved pasture rate, a pasture property, the stocking rate has increased since the panels went in because of the extra green grass underneath. But I do think it has the potential to increase a lot further with a bit of pasture improvement. Seeing the benefits of it, we have since sold our property neighbouring to the solar farm, which is currently under construction. It will be 800 hectares of panels, so there'll be 1,200 hectares of panels in one site, and then we'll hope to run sheep back in there. So there's potential there that we'll have 6,000 or 7,000 dry sheep equivalents running under the panels. But as with the other fellas, you do have to have the ability to get them on and get them off depending on the season. When feed's lush, to assist with my host, the best thing I can do is keep the grass down, so you need more sheep in a hurry. And then obviously as it dries off, and we can get very dusty in dust storms. So probably that's one of the main concerns I would see as a host, is the overgrazing in our environment, creating dust storms and dust on panels, and in turn reducing the production of the panels. And also you don't really need the community wandering past looking at it like a dust bowl. Currently our setup is that it's all one paddock, so mustering is a bit of a logistical nightmare at times. I find sheep graze differently under the panels. Our sheep normally graze, well, all sheep normally graze. If they're comfortable and they've got feed, they stay together. Whereas I find under the panels, as the panels rotate, the sheep look up and their mate's gone because the panels just rotated that little bit. So I do find by the end of the day, they're scattered over the whole site in mobs of 50 and 60, but they all seem to head back to the one spot to camper for night. And I find the best method of mustering is to arrive just before daylight and try and catch them on the camp. There's 2,000 in the mob at any one time, so they take a bit of handling with the dogs. So if you aim to get 60 or 70% on your first day, and then you slowly but surely over 3 or 4 days, 5 days sometimes, you will get them all. Yeah, it's just a bit of a patience game. It's actually quite a challenge. I actually enjoy it. They are a bit reluctant for me to use dogs under the panels where the panels are a bit lower. That was initially when we started 3 years ago, but I do find that now I've got their trust and they have my trust, and I only use the dogs where appropriate. We can use a drone. I haven't used it as yet, mainly because our logistics, if I can get 70% out to truck them away to do whatever needs to be done, 70% is plenty. So each day I can get out whatever we need for the day, essentially. Yeah, other than that, it's very straightforward. The sheep are definitely happier under the panels, while a lot of the percentage of the community see it as an eyesore. there are potential gains. There are massive gains to be made in our environment with increased carrying capacity. The control of weeds. Ours being all set up as one thing. Going forward, I would like to see our governments implement that fencing is mandatory, or at least the potential to fence it down the track. So we're in the position now where we've got this farm and they're not really game to fence anywhere because you're not going to drive a post where you think a cable might be. With woolly merino sheep, the electric fencing isn't ideal with our drier climate because the wool acts as the insulator and they don't actually get the zap that they need, so potentially they end up everywhere anyway. That's one thing I would like to see going forward on other sites, that they fence them up to allow you to crash graze areas. So you can better manage the growth of newer pastures, and you can also better manage the growth of the pasture that's there, and to help with the seeding for ongoing pastures. I don't know what else to add, really.
No, that's perfect, Tony. That was a really good summary, and some good points there. I think that and JR mentioned it too, that earlier involvement of the farmer or grazer in the development phase looks to be pretty important, and it can really increase that genuine dual land use benefit. So I see there is a question there. I will just hold that till the end. In our final pair of speakers, we've got Byron Kominek. Wasn't able to join us. As I mentioned, he's the owner of agri-solar garden in Colorado. He's put together a video, which I'll play soon, but I just thought I'd quickly introduce Emily Puetz, who is a director for the non-profit associated with Jack Solar Garden, and that's the Colorado Agrivoltaics Learning Center. So if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself, Emily, and then we can play Byron's video.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Really great to be here with you. I love that this is a conversation that's happening in New Zealand. We're actually living in New Zealand right now on the North Island, but I serve as the chair of the board for the Agrivoltaic Center. So a lot of really interesting research happening on that site to try and understand, in particular, water levels, as well as the different kinds of food that can be grown underneath the panels. So a little bit different than the sheep grazing, although we do some of that, but definitely growing food and leveraging the shading of the panels in order to grow different types of crops on the site. So.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Emily. So I'll just share my screen now and we can play that video from Byron.
Hi, folks. My name is Byron Kominek. I'm the owner and manager of Jack Solar Garden here in Fuller County, Colorado, and the director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, which is a small nonprofit organization based here at my family's farm, where we provide different types of educational opportunities for youth, folks in our community, as well as policymakers, because we can't get much changed unless we have policymakers better understanding what's possible for our future. So we provide agrivoltaic-related educational opportunities from tours, events, workshops, webinars, and presentations like this one. Let me welcome you out to Jack Solar Garden, where if you come out to my family's farm, this is probably the first thing that you'd see is our sign here with my house on the left side and our silo behind. My grandfather, Jack, bought this land back in 1972, and it's been in my family since. Back in 2020, we took our north pasture, which is one of 3 pastures, that's about 8 acres in size, and so pictured here, and pounded in over 2,300 steel I-beams at varying lengths between, I believe, 15 and 19 feet long. Put up 3,276 solar panels, 2/3 of the property. The panels are flat at about 6 feet high, and the other third is flat about 8 feet high. It's a single axis tracking system, so if it follows the sun east to west over the course of the day, and it turned into a 1.2 megawatt DC community solar garden, 960 kilowatt AC system that is built to maximize energy production, because my family put up our farm as collateral to the bank to build it. So we needed to make sure that we produce as much energy as possible, but we changed 3 things. to help enable for agrivoltaics. One, we elevated the panels a little bit higher so that people, machinery, and vegetation have more space. Two, we had improved wire management. So we have wires tucked up underneath solar panels where it's more difficult for the people to have their fingers be able to hit the panels or hit the wires. And three, we reduced land degradation. So working with our construction team to reduce the amount of traffic out on site. Those are three important aspects of how our system was built. We also, after the system was built in 2021, we ripped and tilled the land to be able to provide space for crops to be able to be grown. And we worked with Sprout City Farms, which is a local nonprofit farming organization, to do this. Here you can see the women in 2023 that were the farm labor for that season, setting up drip tape and planting tomatoes. All of our water comes from fire hydrant, pressure reduced out into drip tape. Over 2 acres of land is underneath, is in vegetable crop production. Here you can see a lot of the veggies grown. Sprout City Farms folks have grown over 25,000 pounds of food in the past few years underneath our panels for carrots, tomatillos, beans, tomatoes, eggplant, garlic, radishes, onions, kale, chard, potatoes. You name the market garden vegetable, they've probably grown it underneath our panels. And what's been fun is this past season, they actually set up the very first CSA, which is community supported agriculture, underneath solar panels in the US. So here they were, where people would pay up front at the beginning of the season to be able to come and collect food throughout the course of the season, grown underneath their solar panels. I've been eating the food underneath their panels for years and tastes quite tasty. We also work with different research institutions on site, from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to Colorado State University and the University of Arizona, studying different types of vegetation and how they respond to the different microclimates underneath our solar panels. Here you can see graduate students from the University of Arizona in 2022 conducting a diurnal study. So they use machinery, or I guess instrumentation, I should say, to monitor how well the different varieties of different crops that are being grown were utilizing the sunlight they were exposed to on an hourly basis throughout the course of the day in the different microclimates that were set up here. It might be difficult to see from some of these pictures, but we have 3 different microclimates, one that gets morning sun, one that gets midday sun, and one that gets afternoon sun. And the difference between morning sun and afternoon sun in Colorado is that the afternoon sun is a lot hotter. In the morning, it could be 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit when it's first getting direct sunlight, while in the afternoon, it could be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are important distinctions. While the morning sun and afternoon sun also only get about 50 to 55% daily sunlight, the middle bed gets closer to 70% of daily sunlight. Here's Amy Marble. She works at the University of Arizona, where she actually does all the measurements throughout the course of the year. So she'll count all the leaves on each plant. She counts the flowers on them. She measures the girth of the plants, how large they're growing out, and she harvests the different fruits or product that we want from the different varieties of crops, and then weighs them out and figures out which variety of which crop does best in which of our microclimates. One fun thing that we were doing with her in the 2023 season was, after she harvested and weighted these different tomatoes, as you can see here, or a variety of other ones, we did taste tests. So the yellow one there, we were doing some taste tests between the morning sun, midday sun, and the afternoon sun. And what we were finding is that the morning sun side tasted more watery, while the afternoon sun tasted more acidic, and the midday sun tasted like what you would get out of the grocery store. So this has implications on, maybe there's a different time of day that you want to harvest these different crops, or maybe you have chefs that want a particular taste of a variety of crop. And so then you figure out which bed you want to put it in. Once we figure out where we want to put these crops, why would we ever put them anywhere else? Because we've optimized their growth. And so that's the role of Amy here on site. We also work with the Colorado State University, and that's these fellas, that were measuring ecosystem services, like the amount of CO2 being sequestered in the soil by measuring what's being emitted, to the grassland health, how well the different types of grasses that we have out here were responding to water stress tests, thermal stress tests. And they went out and collected forage at these different microclimates similar to the vegetables to figure out where the forage was growing the healthiest and most nutritious. And we were learning that within our solar array, we were getting between 90 to 95% of the forage that we would get outside of our solar array, which is good for me, not good for a normal grazer, I would suppose, but for me, I have 100% of the possible renewable energy being produced above ground, and below it, I'm getting still 90 to 95% of the grassland that I would need for animals or for haying continuing our haying operation. So that was fun to learn, and they're going to continue doing work on our field in coming years, especially looking towards soil microbiology. We work with Wish Garden Herbs to learn more about what types of perennial herb crops that we can grow. Here is yarrow, to silver sage, clary sage, and behind these ladies is monarda. We've grown peppermint, lemon balm, boneset, sweetgrass, culinary sage, thyme, rosemary, oregano, a variety of different types of crops, so that we could learn more about what grows best, and then we can plant it better in the future. But we do more than just vegetation. We bring out people. We've had over 4,000 people within our solar array over the past few years. I think we have to be the most visited solar array site in our country, where we have farm to table dinners, tours, workshops, painting programs. We have a variety of different opportunities for folks to come out, learn more about solar energy, see how you can build these things safe for people to be able to operate in, and as well learn about growing different types of vegetation. We provide a stipend each year to a different artist on the farm to do something interesting with our space and bring in community. We teach young people, had over 1,000 high school students over the past few years come out to visit us. And this helps us create community, whereas before, didn't really have people coming out, hanging out on my grassland pastures. Now, within our solar array, we have people being interested in visiting and seeing what we're about. Also on site, we're interested in showcasing what's possible within solar arrays, from chickens and waterfowl to incorporating what I think is the most important thing to work towards, is integrating cattle within a solar array. A lot of the land in the world is ranch land where we have cattle out on it, and as temperatures get hotter, these animals are going to be more stressed, either producing less meat or dying. So being able to have shade for these animals will be important to our beef industry in the future. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, go to www.coagrivoltaic.org to see webinars that we post and record online. We have workshops here at Jack Solar Garden if you want to fly from New Zealand to come visit us. And we have a variety of different videos and more and more guidance documents that we'll be providing over time. But appreciate you all's interest in agrivoltaics, and I hope to see you out here at Jack Solar Garden sometime in the future. Take care.
Awesome. So that's a pretty cool presentation of, I guess, agrivoltaics and a slightly different model to the one we've been talking about previously. If you've got anything you'd like to add to that, Emily, and if not, we can open up to questions.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would just add is I think a lot of the work in the last year has just been trying to create a policy environment where this could be done on other sites. So because a lot of the solar development is happening on ag land, and so it's really figuring out how to kind of create that win-win solution between the policymaker, the farmer, and then whatever's going on underneath the panel. So the policy piece is actually a fairly large part of our work, in addition to education and building community connections.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can imagine that's going to be pretty critical here too. So it's a good point to raise. I see we'll just shoot back to some of the questions we missed. And I think I'll just scroll up here. I think there was a question for Tony. Why would the solar power company be reluctant for you to use dogs under the panels?
I think the concern is where the panels are a little bit lower. I suppose that they've got all caution if I send the dogs around the sheep as they're running away and the dogs get in front and the sheep spook and rear up, there is potential that they can break a panel or bend a panel. But I think initially it was more the unknown that frightened them than the reality that, I mean, there is the potential for it, but if common sense is used, it's basically 0%.
Right, excellent. And I see there was another question too, or it might have been a comment around the use of a drone. And this might be a question for all of the speakers today, just around who has used drones for managing livestock and how has that worked? We'll start with you, Tony.
Certainly I've used a drone to muster. We used to have a property in Western New South Wales. It was 22,000 acres, purely a grazing property. And I did use the drone out there quite successfully. It just doesn't seem to work quite as well under the panels in our environment, like where we are. I have had discussions with them in the event that I need to get them out quickly, as in if there's a worm infestation all of a sudden, or if there's a sudden fly wave. And where we are having discussions around now being able to use a helicopter. And I think with the use of a helicopter, which we used in our Western country, I'd have them out in an hour.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is certainly potential, and we have discussed that. Yes.
Yeah, sure. JR and Rob, if you're still there, have either of you made use of the drones?
I haven't, but my solar sites are probably a slightly more modest size than some of the ones in New South Wales. I mean, like I say, we're talking typically anywhere from 40 hectares up to a large site being maybe 100 hectares, something like that. So yeah, it's probably not no drone needed. We can cover it with a 4-wheeler just as quick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So those 40 to 100 hectare sites, do they have any permanent fencing in them? Aside from we'd usually put up some permanent fence inside them, and that when I talk about a site being 90 hectares, it's probably split into 3 different sites, if you like, 3 different separate paddocks, for want of a better word. So it's all a wee bit more manageable. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. And JR, what's your experience? You've probably got a larger scale.
Yeah, we use drones a lot, probably a couple times a week. We just, on these big sites where even when it's broken, I mean, we've got 1,700 acre sites that are 2 pastures, and we've got 1,700 acre sites that are like 13 or 14 different pastures already with the large exterior fence. So it just depends on what setup it is, but we just have trouble with the dogs. If you're on a 300 or 400 acres worth of panels and the sheep are out in the middle, it's hard to, especially with these above ground cab lines, we can't just take off across there on a 4-wheeler and come out the other side. So if you go down there on a 4-wheeler or a mule or something, you have to turn around and come back or back all the way out. So it's very hard to get the sheep out of there. And when you're working dogs, if you can't see the dogs to tell them what to do, or everybody's just confused on what's going on. So we've just used the drones to basically fly the pasture, make sure we've got everything is what they work really good at. And then we just bunch them up with the drone and get them pushed toward one side or the other of the array. And then we get the dogs on them and take them down a county road to the next pasture, or pin them, or whatever we're trying to do. But it just helps us a lot. Bunch all the sheep up and then get them to one area where we can put the dogs on them and move them that way. And we're also, I know we asked a question about the dogs. We also run a lot of guard dogs here on our array. So we have dogs full time in there, which if really in our area, our coyotes and other predators are so bad that if we couldn't run guard dogs, I probably wouldn't run sheep. So that's another thing to think about, is see if the operator is going to let you run. I don't know if in other countries, if they let y'all run your guard dogs full time with them to keep predators out. But like I said, we got such a bad predator problem, we couldn't run the sheep without them. So we do have guard dogs on site year round.
That's fascinating. Luckily over here we don't have too many predators, but yeah, fascinating to hear what other people are dealing with. There was another question for you, JR. What is the split, if you don't mind answering this, what is the split of total income from panel vegetation management versus meat and wool from the sheep enterprise?
We're all hair sheep, so we don't have any wool enterprise. We're just all meat sheep. But we're probably, well, we're keeping almost all of our ewe lambs. We're pulling out the bottom 10 or 15% of our ewe lambs and selling those. But right now we're expanding so fast on new solar. We're putting most of our ewe lambs over into new solar sites. So we're not actually selling those at this point, which hurts the cash flow a little bit. But we're probably, I mean, our vegetation contracts are probably 65%, and the balance being our buck lamb sales. Somewhere in that ballpark, maybe 60-40 range, somewhere around there.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for that. And there's a question for Tony. When you say green underneath the panels, do you mean in the 400 hectare area, or do you actually mean it stays green directly under the panel itself?
Now, under the whole 400 hectare area, there's enough shade during the day as the panels rotate that it remains green, but literally you step 5 feet outside the panels and it's dry as dry. So they definitely, it retains the moisture. I found there's soakages that are broken out. It's country, even though it was my neighbour's place that it was built on, it's country that I knew pretty well. I'd farmed some of it over the years. And I find with the panels that there's areas, the wet areas that are now broken out. Which I mean, it's another water source. Ours is very primitive, as in for grazing. There is a natural creek runs through it, which I wouldn't call permanent, but it has had water in it for the last 3 years. That's their only water point. So these other little water points throughout it are a benefit. But we don't have any fences anywhere through it. We don't even have a set of stockyards. So everything's portable yards and crutching trailers for crutching time and truck them out for shearing time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I see that JR had actually responded directly to that comment. If you wouldn't mind just talking to that comment, JR, I don't think the rest of our audience can see that. So you've just made a comment that basically you're noticing that there's more moisture retention under the panels as well.
Oh yeah, it's we get really hot and dry here in Texas in the summer, and we'll have 20-30 day stretches, sometimes more than that, 100+ degrees with no rain. And it's crazy. The strip under those panels will stay green, and the strip in the sun will be brown. So it's almost like you painted those stripes. But it retains a lot of moisture under those panels. It's almost like a little microclimate, and it really helps the grazing a lot. Of course, the sheep like that too. Those sheep have shade. They don't have to go 15-20 feet and they're in the shade. So it's not like an open pasture where we're actually seeing better gains on lambs. If we stay away from summer lambs, but we've had a few on some sheep we bought, and we actually have better gains on those lambs under the panels than we do on a regular pasture if they're in the heat. So there's a lot of benefits to the shade as far as forage and just the condition of the sheep.
Excellent. Just on that, in terms of the weeds, do you get an increase in weeds under the panels? And have you noticed anything in terms of the parasites? I'm just thinking there'll be more intense grazing perhaps under the panels. Is there an increased issue with internal parasites? And all three of you guys grazing sheep might want to respond to that.
We're in very high parasite load areas anyway, as far as especially this stuff that's 50-55 inches of rainfall, and just some of that stays really swampy. Some of the stuff we have that's just basically ideal for parasites, warm, humid, and wet. So, I don't know that I know if there's more parasites in the, typically if it gets really hot, there should be more parasites probably under those panels than there is in the middle. But I think you'll probably overcome that with the better forage on that. But we're doing a very intensive rotation on these sheep, so we don't want to leave them on that stuff too long. We're not near down to the pasture size we really need to be, just because we've kind of outran our help a little bit. So we're not doing some crazy everyday rotation or anything like that. It's a few weeks at a time, but just keeping them moving has sure helped a lot, and leaving that rest period fairly long. But I don't know how to answer your question. I'm guessing the environment under those panels is probably better in the summer for parasites than in the sun for sure. But at what extent that is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. But you haven't noticed any increased issues with animal health?
No, I would say in the summer they're actually retaining better body condition just because they do have all that shade and the better forage. So I think that's the trade-off is I think the sheep are actually better than, because we do graze some stuff outside of the arrays and there's a lot of leased acreage outside the array that we graze that we also maintain. So we also fence it and graze it, and those sheep in the panels always do better in the summer.
Yeah, interesting. Tony, have you had a similar experience?
Ours is probably a little bit different because it's all one large paddock essentially. We don't stock it to a high rate. We could stock a lot more there if we could have it fenced up. So we don't actually stock it to a high rate. So essentially we've always got a good grass cover. So essentially they're always grazing relatively high, but touch wood to date, we haven't had any issues with internal parasites causing problems. But I mean, it's probably more preventative. So when they do come in, whether you think they need it or not, they get it because they're not coming in very often, and the logistics of getting them in and out. So you're probably your management is more about prevention rather than cure once it's done.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Rob, if you're still on, we've got a question saying, Rob mentioned that the power line through the county was a big advantage. How close does a solar farm need to be to a power line? And Alan might be able to speak to this too for a New Zealand context. How big a power line? And is it just the power line, or do you need a substation to plug into?
Sure, I'm just a farmer. Sorry, I don't design them.
I think Alan might be able to talk to this.
Yeah. Someone else better get me out of trouble because I haven't got a clue. Sorry.
Well, I mean, the short answer to that is the closer the better. You don't want to be more than a few hundred meters away from at least the low voltage power lines. I mean, you don't need to necessarily be close to a substation. So, I mean, that can be installed. But obviously better if you do. Yeah, the closer the better, but you need to engage with your solar developer or project developer and see what the associated cost might be.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan. There's a question here, and it came up in our last webinar, and we've addressed it in our report as well around fertilizer. Are any of you guys able to apply fertilizer? And if so, how do you do that? And I'll start with Rob.
We don't apply fertilizer. We just use legumes. I imagine they wouldn't be terribly happy. They probably have concerns with the fertilizer rotting the steelwork or something like that. But it'd be more a case if I had to, you probably just wouldn't. Yeah, we just wouldn't do it. Probably, like say, there'd be too many liability issues for us to do that sort of thing.
No, absolutely. Tony, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, we haven't fertilised at all. There probably is potential for it. Like we will rely on legumes crops as well, but there would be potential to run some fertiliser directly into with your seeding process, which I think would work quite like aerial spreading or spreading would be out. But I would think there's no reason why you couldn't scratch it in between the rows.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. And JR, have you had experience with putting on fertilizer?
Well, these sheep are fertilizing all the time. No, I just had to get a smart comment in there. We when we're working on, now that we're actually getting access early in development, we are taking soil samples, and before we do any pre-seeding development, and getting soil samples ran, vegetation samples ran, and when they initially plant the that first seeding before there's ever a panel or a pile on your property, that may call for some fertilizer, but after the panels are up, we're not fertilizing anything. It's not I mean, we just haven't had that scenario, so we don't. It'd be very hard to do in these panels to get it right. Be very expensive as well, but there is some fertilizer put down sometimes when some of this soil's not very good, depending on what the prior land use was before they seed it the first time before construction. Yeah,
right. No, that makes sense. And Emily, in terms of fertilizer at Jack's Solar Garden, is that something you are familiar with?
They're not applying any fertilizer other than they do bring in herds of sheep occasionally to graze under the panels and using the natural fertilizer in that regard, but they're not applying any other additional fertilizer beyond that.
Sure. Thank you for that. And just quickly, while I've got you, Emily, are you aware, was Jack's Solar Garden growing this variety of crops prior to the solar farm? This was all a part. He was really looking for like the synergies of, how could we call it the few nexus, food, energy, water, because water is a big issue in Colorado. It's very dry, so it's a little bit of an opposite problem than I sense in New Zealand, but it was really about water retention, and the panels provide kind of that natural shading environment. And so it was sort of, how do we use this land, to really support people in a different kind of way, was kind of the big question they started with. And then that idea of, he was close to a hookup on the grid, and he said, if we did solar panels, what could we do under the solar panels? And he studied one of the big models, I think it was in Japan, where they were growing massive amounts of goji berries underneath the panels. So yeah, that was kind of the origins of it. Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. We've got a question here saying, thank you so much, everyone. This has been great. If you had one tip for developers to make sure they design farms to make it easier and better to farm, what would that be? And because you're still there, Emily, I'll throw that question to you first, if you've got any ideas.
I should look at this. Sorry.
No, that's all right. So the question was, if you had one tip for developers to make sure they design farms to make it easier and better to farm, what would that one tip be for developers, at that early stage?
For solar developers. So the big question we wrestled with, and when they were first designing, was the height of the panels. So, and it's an extra cost up front to elevate those panels, but it allows for so much more to happen underneath them. So it's really, I think that's the biggest thing, is elevating the panels allows for just a bunch of other stuff to take place underneath, whether that's cattle grazing or sheep grazing or various different kinds of vegetable production. So I think that part is really, I would say that's probably a really important factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, do you have any inputs on that question?
Yeah, it'll be largely along the same sort of lines. It'll be just keeping them high enough so you can actually, your sheep can wander underneath them fairly easily. And then just the gap between the two panels, the sort of, the larger the gap, the more grass you're really going to grow, if you like, or good quality grass you're going to grow. And the ability to get sort of machinery up and down is pretty key. Probably, with enough area around the edges just to turn around. It's just basic accessibility things,
Yeah, that makes sense. JR and Tony, anything more to add?
Well, on our sheep grazing, a big problem we have is water access. So if there's not local water or water lines or something like that, our biggest expense on the sheep side of it, if there isn't water, is hauling water, because in the summer it's really a full-time job for one guy that hauls water every day to these big herds of sheep. So people don't realize in the summer, 100 degrees and 1,000 ewes, they consume a lot of water. So water access is a big one for grazing side of it. And then like Rob said, there's really some considerations on above ground cables, below ground cables. We've even seen some sites that they thought they were trying to do really good. They buried cables, but down at the end of the rows, they don't have enough room between the end of the end of that string to the chain link fence to even get a tractor to turn around down at the end. So they did it really well, and they had wide rows where they thought they were going to run tractors down through there, but they really didn't figure what the turning radius is down at the end. So it was kind of just a few extra feet out would have got a tractor turned around. So just little equipment, things like that. Being able to get big trailers in for grazing sure helps. If they got an entrance that allows you to get in with a 30 or 40-foot trailer. But really, water is the biggest one for us. If in an ideal world, we would have water lines and permanent fencing in these things, but and we're getting there now on some projects. But there's a lot of projects we still have that we're still hauling water to the pastures.
Yeah, sure. And Tony, any final comments on that one?
Much the same. Like for ours, I'd like to see it fenced up a lot more, but fencing with the sheep in mind rather than the panels in mind, so you can rotate simpler. Infrastructure and water's key. And in our environment, I guess the water points need to be situated in areas where the panels aren't. With the high traffic area of the stock walking to water points, it creates a lot of dust. the less dust on the panels, the better. So just a bit of planning on that side of it. Yeah, but water and fencing for me.
No, absolutely. Continuing that theme of water, there's a question here. Are the panels capturing water dew and helping drip moisture to help pasture growth a bit like a tree does?
Well, I think there's no doubt that leading edge can be right off that leading edge. Some of those biggest weeds, that's where they're going to grow, is right off that leading edge a lot of times. So there's it's just like a roof. So if early mornings, late evenings, you're going to have a little more concentration of water there just off that leading edge. So and that causes a problem, because if that's where the biggest weeds grow, that's right on the edge of where they're going to grow up the side of the panel and shade a panel. So that is one little drawback, but it's very easy to manage that because it's easy to get to. So that's better than the water going straight down onto piles or down on a cab line or something else. So it's really out in the open for you to either graze or mow, whichever you got to do.
Yeah, sure. And I think perhaps I was talking to Alan about this, where they are looking to try to capture that water, but I'm not sure if any of the panelists have any experience with that.
The one thing they are doing, one of the researchers is measuring water retention. So they're not capturing it per se, but they're really trying to look at like the moisture levels within the soil and how that varies depending on, the location, like where the panel is. And so they're finding significantly higher levels of water retention in the soil around the panels, which again, for a dry climate is really helpful.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. Another question here is around potential contaminants from the panels entering the soil over the life of the panel. When you're taking hundreds, even thousands of hectares of panels in one patch, their combined input could be multiplied. I appreciate most of you are newish solar farmers, so maybe not relevant, but I think Alan is sort of a conversant on this topic, might be able to address this question.
Yeah, it's been investigated around the world, but it's been shown, because there was some concerns with the coating on some of these panels over long duration. But yeah, what the research has shown, this is not really a concern. We don't see that contaminants.
Excellent. Thanks, Alan. Question for Tony with
Sorry,
development.
Anna.
Yes.
Just on that point, one
Yes.
of the interesting things we always had is, I'm not sure how relevant it is to other countries, but within all of the sites we have, they have sort of a 25-year life, and part of the planning conditions to having a solar farm is to, at the end of a 25 years, in theory, you should be able to take the land and return it back to its full agricultural worth or value, if you like. So you should be able to remove everything from site. And there is an expectation that the solar company would do that. One of the problems we've been having in the UK is as sites are starting to get to the end of their life, and the cost of actually trying to clean these sites up, for want of a better word, or return them to as nature intended, is so humongously large. The companies just go sort of declare themselves bankrupt instead, and so there have been several sites that potentially are sort of left in that way. So I guess not completely relevant to your question. It's an interesting point to some of the farmers that are considering this sort of thing or going in with developers, is to make sure that if there is any planning permissions that state you have to have an exit plan to return the farmland back to normal, make sure that the sort of money goes into escrow or make sure there's some sort of fund available to do it, because a couple of farmers in the UK side have got caught up by that a wee bit.
Wow, that's a really interesting insight and pretty valuable to be aware of. So thank you for that.
And on that real quick, I think most of these in the US now on the new side are having to put up bonds initially that will cover whatever that tear down cost is, whatever you want to call it. So I think there's a lot of those. I'm not sure if that's nationwide or specific entities that are forcing them to do that, but most of these are putting up a bond ahead of time that will cover whatever that cost is to return that. And just one real quick thing on that runoff. The runoff is a very big issue with solar that we really have to pay attention to. And I think that goes back to managing these sites correctly to keep some forage and keep a good turf, because if we overgraze these or overmow them, we are just going to cause runoff and cause lots of issues with erosion and other issues with that. So because now that a lot of these trackers are able to be used on inclines and sloped areas very easily, we can run into some erosion problems if we're not taking care of that turf.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I've just seen a couple of panels, and you can see where that drip line is, so you can see it is something that would need to be managed. Have any of the graziers had experience of both a fixed system and tilt? Does more pasture grow in one of these systems versus the other?
I guess it's actually fixed or fixed tilt versus single axis tracking.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of our sites are on trackers, so I don't have a lot of information about fixed tilt. So somebody else may be able to answer that, but all of ours are trackers.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm the same. All of ours, they're all trackers. So yeah, no idea with the fixed ones.
We must just be a really tight part of the world then, because all ours are just fixed. They don't move at all.
Yeah, those are sure a lot harder to mow and weed eat. So.
Yeah, no, and just to make a point there to what Tony was saying earlier on in the question about is it just green beneath the panels versus across the land, and this is the benefit with tracking, right? Because your sunlight is sort of, and your shade, if you will, is moving across the land during the day, so that's why we get it. Whereas with fixed, there might be an issue because then you have the rows that are continuously in the sunlight.
Thanks, Alan. And Emily, I think you're actually typing the answer, but I'll ask you that question. What have you found to be the ideal spacing of panels for food growing?
Yeah, I just got a couple of questions there. So there's 24 total acres on the property. Only 4 of the acres is under solar.
Yes.
And so they're using, but everything that's under the solar, he's using to grow food. The spacing is 17 feet apart. So what is that? About 5 meters in between. So that's sort of how they've established it. And that's wide enough to get a small tractor through. So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Conscious of time, we've probably gone over a little, so I will need to wrap this up. I just want to thank all of the speakers very much for their time. And I'll just put up our links as well. So yeah, just really want to show our appreciation to our speakers. It's just been fantastic to have you all from all around the world with all quite different experiences, but really good nuggets of knowledge that we can put to use here in New Zealand as we kind of start out in this agrivoltaic pathway. For those people who would like more information, I've popped up the contact details for myself and Alan. And I'd also like to thank our Land and Water who have funded this project. And yeah, it's been a really interesting project. I've got a link also to some of our resources, which I put up earlier. If we haven't managed to get through, I see there were a couple of questions that we didn't quite get to. I think they are both questions that Alan and I can address. So we'll free up the time of our international speakers. And yeah, just want to say thank you all very, very much.